You all set in the back? Good.
Yeah, that was.
Welcome, everyone, to our quarterly review meeting for the Fairfield Board of Finance. This evening, we're going to be reviewing results through December 31st, 2013, along with a discussion of the pension board. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Mary LeClaire to lead us in the pledge tonight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. We've got a relatively limited agenda this evening as we face our budget gauntlet coming just in a week or so. We'll be starting that. Item number one will be to approve some minutes from our last regular monthly meeting. Item two will be a review on the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. Item three will be the Board of Ed financial projections for this year. Again, we've covered some of that when we talked about the special ed shortfall, so I don't think we're going to cover much new ground on that at this point in time. Dr. Teitel has been in contact with me and has spoken about giving us a definitive update, let's call it a definitive update, on March 6th, which is the same evening the Board of Education comes before us to present its budget. I have that date right? So that'll give Dr. Teitel the opportunity to get better numbers from the state, scrub some of the numbers within his own administration, share the numbers with the Board of Education, and then come back to us on March 6th. We may even start a little early that evening in order to hear where we stand for the fiscal year. Okay? So we'll do our normal quarterly review, and then on that night, we'll get additional information. Then we'll hear from the town this evening. That's item number 4. And then item number 5 this evening was to hear from the investment subcommittee on a policy update. You'll recall this has to do with what we would refer to as our cash accounts or our day-to-day operating balance that the chief fiscal officer and his team manages to pay down the bills for the town. So we collect all the tax revenue. That sits in our accounts. There's some investment activity along those accounts, and then that money is used through the course of the years to pay down the operating balance. We put together a board of a year and a half or so, maybe even more now, to start reviewing these policies surrounding management of those accounts and putting in place an investment guidelines, putting in place some management controls, some cash reporting, working very closely with the chief fiscal officer and his team, the result of which was a policy that came out. Now, this is a non-voting item for us because this is really not within our purview. It's within the administration's purview. But since it does, A, impact the budget, and B, there's a certain level of risk associated with the investments in this, we were invited in by former First Selectman Flato to review the situation, and that's continued with the current administration. So a tentative policy was to be put before us this evening. We're going to ask that we pull that back, pull it off the agenda, and Mr. Brockfeld's request, who's the chairman of our little subcommittee here, because there's some questions that have arisen on that from our subcommittee, which is Mr. Brockfeld, myself, and Mr. Brown, and we would like the opportunity to review that with the First Selectman and the Chief Fiscal Officer before we talk about it at the full board table. So we're going to pull item 5 from the agenda. That's a little last-minute change to our program. Before I go into the minutes, are there any questions, comments, concerns from board members on any item tonight? Seeing none, we'll take up item number 1, which is to approve the minutes of the regular monthly meeting of the Board of Finance from February 4th, 2014. A motion to put it before us, Mr. Brown, seconded Mr. DeWitt. Are there any questions, comments, concerns on the minutes? Seeing nothing from the board, anything from the public? Nothing from the public, so I'm going to call for a vote on this item to approve the minutes of the regular monthly meeting of the Board of Finance from February 4th, 2014. All in favor? Those opposed? Abstentions? Mrs. Alvin abstained. I believe she was absent from that meeting, right? And so is Bob. Thank you. You were late on that one. Or I was late seeing you on that one. All right. Item number 2, to review the current status of the town's pension and OPEB funds. I think we have Mr. Vahey here. Welcome. And Bob Mayer, the Chief Fiscal Officer, who also serves on those boards, is here, and Mr. Tetro is here as well. So thank you. Welcome, Brian.
Hi there.
Thanks for coming out tonight.
My pleasure. So, you guys have the flash reports in front of you?
We do.
OPEB and, well, let's do OPEB first because that one's all invested now. It has an IPS in place, which is very similar to the pension. The only difference being because of its size, it's just stocks and fixed income. It doesn't have alternative assets, but it's 70-30 split, as you can see on page 1, the target values for assets in U.S., international stocks, and fixed income. And it's showing cash, which it usually doesn't. That I think that was just the inflows, and it hadn't gotten put into its allocations yet. And on the second page, you can see the returns that really are only 6 months because we got the strategy in place. But glad we did, given the very stellar returns in the equity markets last year. I think you had asked at the last meeting about the actuarial assumptions for this, but
Yes.
I might. It was a while ago, so I don't have those, but that seems to just.
It always comes up. The actuaries are coming before us, correct? What is the date on that?
It'll be March 3rd,
Okay,
the
so there'll
first
be-
budget date. That's also the date of the pension and the OPEB budget information presentation.
And they will be here that night. Will we get their report prior to March 3rd?
When you say the report, you already have the reports.
No?
No. Well, then I'll give them out tomorrow.
Okay. Because we don't have them.
I thought they were distributed.
No? Okay, when were they received?
Well, we're talking about the OPEB reports.
Oh,
The
pension
reports.
reports, both.
Yeah,
When were the
we haven't received the final pension report. We received the final OPEB report. I don't remember when, but I know we have it.
Okay, when are we receiving the final pension report?
I can't, well, the draft will be presented to the pension board the 24th of this month. You receive that one shortly after that date.
Okay. And that is for the pension report as of June 30th of 2013, correct?
July 1, 2014.
July 1, 2013.
To 2013, thank you, right.
June 30th, July 1.
Well, it's July, I'm not sure what the exact
It's 8
definition is, but it's always dated the first day of the fiscal year as opposed to the last day of the fiscal year.
Right, and it's 8 months. Okay. And after our financial statements, and just before our budget process, and when we get the budget.
Right.
Yeah, that timing doesn't work.
I understand, one of the things that you brought up, I think was brought up in the conversation between Mr. Vahey and the board last month was, it'd be nice to have it sooner so we could get the numbers in the financial statements earlier, but since it's dated July 1, and I do have a email and call into the audit partner, since it's dated July 1, which is a day after the fiscal year, I do not know if they would be included even if they were available, but I don't know that they wouldn't be there. But
Yeah,
that's a
Mr.
question that's outstanding.
Yeah, Mr. Senafani, when he was here last time, said about half the towns do it as of that date, and about half the towns do it the prior year. It's based on best available information, is
Yeah.
what he told me,
Yeah.
so. Okay, so
Yeah.
we'll get that information, so we'll be able to have the discussion on the actuarial assumptions on March 3rd.
Right, yes, because, yeah, I think the 24th is the fourth Wednesday, which is the date of the pension board meeting.
Yeah, it's the 4th, not the 3rd.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Brockville.
I just want to clarify for Mr. Mayor. So we want to obviously look at the the liability actuarial assumptions for the OPEB, right?
Correct.
So could we ask, those are written down somewhere, I assume, could we ask maybe that could be forwarded to us before the meeting?
Yeah, I'll send out the OPEB reports tomorrow.
Yeah, that's what, he said he already had the OPEB reports, and the assumptions are detailed
Oh,
on
I'm
that,
sorry. I
correct?
thought
Yeah.
you said they weren't there yet, okay.
Yeah,
You're talking about the pension.
right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brockville, for the clarification. Anybody else have any questions on OPEB? Mr. Vehy, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you brought up a topic that's near and dear to my heart, so thank you. Any other comments from you on the OPEB? No, anybody else on OPEB at this point? Go right ahead. Thanks.
Okay, and that takes us to the pension assets, which should be another flash report dated December 31st, 2013. We haven't met yet in 2014 due to the December meeting was Christmas Eve, and January I think we got snowed out, so we'll be meeting here, I believe that's next week. Because I'm noticing here that because returns were so strong towards the end of the year that actually the equity fixed income thing got a little skewed because of that return. It went up a few percent towards the end of the year. But you'll see on the first page that assets went from 337 to 342 just in the 1 month period. And if you continue on, you can see the returns. And since it was the year end, you can see on page 3 that for 2013 it was 15.7% return, and we our managers outdid the benchmark for last year.
I'm sorry.
Please.
So these are calendar year returns, even though we work on a fiscal year. Is that right?
We have fiscal year returns. They're done in our quarterlies.
Oh,
So, I
okay.
mean, they track that. I mean, right, but he said that he wanted his fiscal year, which we do have a fiscal year calc. It's in, this is just not in the flash reports. It's in that quarterly thing.
Presented in the third quarter fiscal year.
Sure. Yeah, no, that was an observation. That wasn't I mean, just sitting here, I mean, it just, I mean, first of all, the numbers are terrific, so you might as well brag about them. But I mean, you know, we operate, obviously, in the town of Fairfield on a July 1 to June 30th basis. That's what all
Yeah,
our,
I believe,
future
I just looked at our,
contributions are. Yeah, so-
we just got our quarterly report, and I believe we're a little over 10%.
Right.
So far.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'm sorry, for the last.
starting in June through, so for the 6
I'm sorry,
months.
from June, right, okay.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Walsh?
Brian, this question might have been asked during the last quarterly. In regards to being invested, say, like in domestic equities, where we have 31.27% of our investment, where BlackRock makes up 17.8%, what's the investment guideline? Is there a specific amount, or do you just not have it? As long as you're around the target, you're good?
The IPS says no more than 15% or 2/3 of the target allocation. So, so in which case, I think that's what it says, right? Because it was redone in April. So the the 17.8 is not over the limit.
It's not over the two-thirds?
No. I believe it had to be two-thirds, it had to be over 20% to violate the manager thing.
And is that an area where you're going to be, because the target's 25, are you going to be bringing that down a little bit, or are you just going to
A
leave
little
that
bit.
alone?
That one normally runs high because you'll notice private equity is low, so the placeholder for private equity is public equity. So that's why that imbalance has been that way for a while, because we fund private equity as we get capital calls. So I think, well, you can see just in this, since the last time we met, it's gone up by 70 basis points in private equity. We got a capital call from Mesero. But we expect that to be funded over the next 2 years. So you'll see it creeping up, and you'll see the money coming out of public equity.
So in this case, in this quarter, or by the end of the year, did the domestic equities, the net new investment went down by 1.8, but I also know that private equities went up by about 1.8. Is that where the money went? Or am I not understanding?
I'm sorry, I lost you on the what went down by 1.8?
The net new investment,
Uh-huh.
is that money that's coming out of there where it says a negative?
I believe we did a little bit of reallocation, maybe some payments, Bob? I don't remember, that's, generally, we took money out as net new investment. So I think we reallocated to, oh, yeah, it went, yeah, you can see there it was.
Private equity.
There it is, yeah, so that's
Yeah,
what we did.
that was the question. That's where it went, correct? Okay.
Plus, when we need to fund the plan for benefit payments, we're taking out of the domestic equity because of the overweight there.
Yeah, it's been outperforming, so.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Walsh?
No, thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions? Anything else we should know, Brian, while we sit here tonight?
No, we've had most of our, we're reviewing existing managers and strategies there, but I mean, we've pretty much in a good place. We don't have anything new to identify. We're just reviewing existing managers on a schedule. And we could always hope for another year like this, but I think it was one of the top 3 years for equities in the past 75 years. So wouldn't hold my breath on that, but like you said, we'll just enjoy it.
Anything else?
Just one last question. Brian, that strategy that you guys had where you're to cut down on the fees, that's still working pretty well, correct?
Well, as far as cutting down on fees, it was just through analysis of, well, one, yeah, we went away from active management.
Active management, yeah.
In large cap. Mm-hmm. And that saved us $400,000 or $600,000 a year. And also, Callan, who was our advisors, they identified when we were going through the funds that for whatever reason a while ago when we first were put into the funds, we were in the wrong class of funds, which were costing us a little bit extra, so they saved us. Callan actually, they paid for their fee, essentially, with the cost savings they found, which, that's great. That's what we're paying them for, so.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Good. Somebody? Mr. Vahey, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
We look forward to similar returns this year. All right. We're going to move on to item number 3, which is to review the Board of Education financial position versus the budget as of December 31st. And as again, we've had some previous discussion on this item, but in case board members had any additional questions, I asked our colleagues, Dr. Tittle and Mrs. Munzel, to be here tonight, and I thank them. They also, I understand, have the newly printed, the newly published, approved Board of Education budget books to pass out to us for our meetings come March. So, Dr. Tittle, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
It's actually timely because one of the updates we do to the budget book when we print it this time is we reproject the current year expenses, which is the topic of this evening. So what you'll see in here now, in terms of a projected deficit, is about $742,000 net from where we were. If you remember, we had been talking about a $1.4 million deficit, and we had talked about the freeze and how much we could save, and we've been steadily upping that number. We're about at the end of the line here, and we're starting to get some additional expenses now due to these storms. So what you'll see in here projected now includes the money we expect to save from the freeze. So that's in here on page 107. That's where the bottom line is, which is consistent. My last public statement about this was that we were thinking we could save through the freeze between $500,000 and $700,000. If we're able to save the full $700,000, it will leave us $700,000. So we're inching up on it. I'm still hopeful we can get it, squeeze another 50, 75 out of it, then we're probably at the end of the line. But I'll have the definitive answer, as definitive as these answers can be, as you said, in March. So that's how this relates to the current topic at hand. Otherwise, it's just the new book. So that's really all I have on that front. So I know we've been over this several times, and be happy to answer questions people have.
Questions on the year-to-date numbers from the Board of Education, anyone? Dr. Tuttle, one of the key areas we always look at is insurance and how you guys are performing versus your insurance projections. Medical insurance, what do we know about that? Mr. Mayor, if you have anything, please jump in. But what do we know right now, year-to-date, our medical insurance performance?
Well, there's good news and there's bad news.
Okay.
The good news is that we're still ahead of the projection for the current year. The bad news is that we're not as far ahead as we were 3 months ago. So we're not in a difficult spot right now for the current year budget in terms of contributions. And again, as you know, these things fluctuate monthly. But the trend deteriorated somewhat from when the time this budget was put together. So, again, that can reverse itself in 2 months, or it can go sideways, or anything can happen to it. So that's where we are
Do we
right
have
now.
dollars that we can talk about? Round numbers?
Yes, we do somewhere. It's in here. Yeah, is this in here? Here for 13-14. Right. So for 13-14, we're projected to be about $600,000 ahead of the game. But right now, we're close to a similar amount for 14-15 on the wrong side of that equation. So,
What does that mean?
well, in other words, we were doing incredibly well through October when we did our budget.
Okay.
And then November and December deteriorated, but we're still ahead of where we were. So if this trend continues, then 14-15 won't be in a good spot right now. But right now, 13-14 is still ahead of the game. So we were at one point close to $900,000 ahead of the game for the current year.
So
Now we're about 600 ahead of the game.
So is that a last 2 month?
2 months of experience.
So 2 months of experience has dipped into your projected
Surplus.
good guy.
Yes,
by
right.
About a third.
Correct.
Right. And that's through December?
Right. We
So
don't have anything.
January, February, you don't have information?
We don't have January yet.
Right. Right. But that's with 6 months left to go in the fiscal year.
Right. Right. So we're, in the current year, we're still ahead of the projections,
Right,
but not as far ahead as we were,
right.
based on 2 months. And, I think each month or two, they'll update it, and the thing can move around again on us.
And they're gonna update it before our budget process as well, correct?
Not sure when the next scheduled update is, do you know? I'm not sure.
We will have the January information, hopefully, before the end of this month.
Great, great. Any other questions from anybody on this topic? Any other topics?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Walsh.
You said you were going to possibly squeeze another $50,000 to $75,000 of expense out to try to level off that number. How are you going to do that?
Well, we are, that would be net, because we're seeing some things go up that are obviously not in our favor. Our snow removal costs, in particular, our overtime that we have to pay for snow removal, those are now running higher than we projected. We've got a couple of anticipated vacancies that going to probably materialize shortly, that either by holding off on filling them or filling them with a lower paid person, we think we can capture some money in turnover there. We've got a couple irons on the fire in there, without getting too specific. So we anticipate some positives there. And then, we're continuing to, as the year moves along, made some projections about how much we think we need in certain accounts, and each couple weeks that go by, we can shrink that a little bit. But mostly it would be in personnel turnover that we anticipate. There's not going to be a huge number. In the grand scheme of things, it will help, but it's not going to get us close to zero.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the number you came in projected for tonight, or at least was 742?
742 is, the number's in this book, right?
What page was that on? I thought you said
107. Well, that actual number doesn't exist on page 107. You have to subtract the estimated expenses from the budget, and that will give you exactly $742,381.
So
We have
you're
to be exact to make it budget. Our projections are not that precise. Doreen's good, but not that good.
So where we stand right now is if between 50 and 75, so let's just say closer to 50 if we're going to be conservative. You're still going to be at approximately $700,000 deficit.
Yeah.
And
That's a
there's
good
nothing
guess.
further that you see that can be done.
Between now and March 6th, we'll see what we can do. But you're in the ballpark. As I am concerned about some expenses that have gone higher than we, a month ago. Some things were in better shape than they are now. So some of our squeezing down on things is just to make up for some of that. The heating costs, the degree days, the fuel costs, not the usage has gone up quite a bit. We had those two really big cold snaps and forced us to keep pipes from freezing, to keep some of the buildings warmer at night than we normally would do. But it's a good investment, but it costs you money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Moving target.
Anybody else? Specific items? Mr. DeWitt, I saw your hand.
I won't belabor much points here, but I just wanted to talk, a change from the first draft budget book to this budget book. On page 27, other revenue sources, there's been a decrease of revenue, 56,000 and 20,000. Those were the Board of Education changes in the final vote, correct? That reduced revenue. It was the sports facility rental and the
Yes.
parking fees?
Parking fees were not touched.
The parking fees weren't a minus in your old book, were they? That number's,
They reduced it, right. Reduced it back. They weren't eliminated. Yeah, reduced to the prior year number.
Sorry, right,
Correct.
they're $20,000 lower, right.
Yes,
Gotcha,
correct.
Right.
Right.
The
That-
sport facility rental, I'm trying to remember, that's the outside entities have to pay to use a gym, is that?
No, it's a charge to sports
Charge.
teams.
Oh, that's pay to
Charge-
play.
Yeah, it's a charge to students
Got it,
for those sports that have a rental fee.
got it, thank you.
Anything on the quarterly report, Mr. DeWitt?
No, that's it.
Mrs. Leclerc, do you have anything? All set? Mr. Becker?
Yeah, thank you. Just, now that you're clearly, with some of the expenses going up, you're narrowing that down. I think at this point, it's relatively safe to say we're going to be in that 700 sort of mark. You might get to 50 or 75, something like that. So at our next meeting, we're expected to have I mean, is the administration then going to start to bring some things and be a little bit more than just preliminary at that point? Because I think one of the concerns we've had has been the further we run this out, the less planning on that side. I mean, it seems like you're saying at this point, as we just inch closer, that we're running out of options. We pretty much know just about where that's going to be. So I just want to make sure, I guess, that you know, there's more, something's kind of presented to us at that meeting more than just, here's our number, now you go figure it out. Because we're going to be heading right into budget at that point as well, so, and we're running it, and the clock's going to be running out on the fiscal year.
So I think that's a discussion that we're actually going to have with Mr. Tetro and the Board of Selectmen. And
Yeah.
those discussions are starting now, but I think we need to formalize those as Dr. Title and his team tells us exactly what our problem is. So I think that now that he's come forward and said the problem's in the, and I'll use a number, $600,000 to $700,000 range, now that's our bogey.
Yep.
And we have to discuss what levers we can pull. One of those questions, one of those levers, one of those things to look at, and one of the reasons I asked the question was really, what's going on the insurance side of the house, and is there possible that it already exists within their budget, some area that they're not going to touch without our blessing, that can help mitigate some of the problems they're having, right?
Yeah, no, good point, and I
Yeah.
agree. I think, I'm more so just bringing up that we've been
Yeah.
talking about more March 6th, but I think based upon what you're saying, I appreciate, you know, being forthright with it, but what you brought up tonight a little bit sort of starts to solidify it a little bit earlier than I think, was even thinking about, so.
I knew that based on the last time I was here, you guys were, the clear message I got was you wanted a number sooner rather than later. So I'm obliging.
Good?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Good.
yeah, certainly, I'm sure you're having conversations on behalf of the board, or,
I'm waiting for
Yeah,
now Mr.
so-
Tetro to come back to us, and
and that's,
then we have to discuss it, all of us.
yeah, no, but at this point, at least in my mind, it's in that point, it's
I
worth
agree.
starting it versus waiting, I think, at this point, because we're in a different spot than even a couple of weeks ago with solidifying, so, thanks.
Sure. Mr. Stone?
Just a comment. The town budget's pretty lean to begin with. So I think if we're looking for $600,000 or $700,000, if it can't come from the town, it has to come from somewhere. So I think the Board of Ed should look for, you know, make those recommendations where they could cut even further if they have to.
Mr. Tyler, would you, Dr.
Well, we've been, we started at 1.4 million, and we've been feverishly working to whittle that thing down as low as we possibly can. And I think I was pretty clear, first meeting in January, that was not going to happen, that we would get all the way down to zero. So we're getting as far as we can get to, and you want to know where I think as far as we can get to is, we're closing in on it. I don't see a lot of other options for us at this point. So I think that's why you guys wanted to have an idea of where we thought, you know, the deficit would be. If we thought we could cover the whole thing, never would have been here. Wouldn't need you. So I don't think we're going to get it down to zero. I think this is our best effort.
Which I understand. The only thing is, no one prints money, so somehow this deficit's got to be made up somewhere, you know, and I don't know what Mr. Tetro has in mind. I don't know what the town has to give, and I'm just saying there might have to be some more hard choices. So that's where I'm coming from, and just be prepared, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. I'm going to go to Mr. Walsh.
Dr. Tedder, are you working with the administration on this, or are you just doing this strictly in-house with you guys?
Well, right now, my goal was to get as accurate a number as possible, which is our in-house work. Because some of the discussions I've had with Mr. Flynn and Mr. Tetro have been, well, depending on what the number is, that will either open or close certain options that might be out there. So it was a little bit premature to have any discussions about what the options could be until there was a number. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg kind of a situation. So our task has been to work in-house with our own folks to see what's the lowest we could bring it to, and then say, all right, this is where we think we are. Now let's talk about what the options are. So it's pretty much been an in-house discussion in terms of getting our budget down, or getting our expenses as low as possible between now and the end of the year. That's been our work. Hasn't been a ton of discussion about what the choices are.
So is the administration hearing for the first time that that number 742 and may go down to 700? Are they hearing that for the first time right here tonight?
Mr. Tetro, can you come on up
Right.
and share what?
And I don't, I mean, Mr. Flynn, if you've had conversations with it too, you can join into that conversation. I don't know, but to me, this number's got to have to be addressed like today. We are burning daylight. We can't wait for another meeting. I mean, we got to start putting stuff into effect today.
Thank you. I think just to review the time frame again, Dr. Title came before this board
January 4th or 5th, somewhere in that area.
somewhere in that, I think it was that Tuesday. January 3rd, I think, was the Friday, so somewhere down it. It was January 2nd that Dr. Title gave me a call and said, hey, we have a problem. We sat down that afternoon. On January 3rd, Mr. Flynn and I, and Tom, forgive me, we've sat down a few times, but I can't remember whether that was a phone call or time, but we had an extensive conversation about what some of the options are and what numbers we needed. We then sat down with Chief Fiscal Officer, Mr. Mayor. So Mr. Flynn, Mr. Mayor, and I sat down,
That was late January.
thought it was prior to that, but perhaps, and talk through what some of the options are based on what the numbers are coming back. All right, as you've all reviewed the budget books, finding 700 grand in a line item is a little hard. So so we explored, brainstormed some different issues. Dr. Title's task would come back and give us a number so we could kind of get close, and you're right. Plus or minus 50 grand is close enough for us to start solidifying some options. So the action item coming out of here is to sit down with Mr. Flynn, Mr. Mayor, and explore some options and try and solidify what the choices are and what challenges are, because we've got to resolve it by June 30th. And one of my questions to Dr. Title was, what is the cutoff date? I think I'm still waiting to hear the definitive answer back on that. But is it June 30th, like at midnight, or much like our fiscal year is open?
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, is it really July 30th or August 30th as we add numbers up so we can see where we stand?
Okay, we seem to have a number and a target to head towards right now, which seems to be 700,000. It seems to be, I'm like, Dr. Title, if I'm not saying the right number, just let me know, but for a round number, 700,000. What actions are being taken on the town side to try to either cut capital spending, cut budgets, cut education, cut whatever departments, whatever is left, so that we, on June 30th, have a balanced budget?
We will have a balanced budget on June 30th. The question is, how do we do that? We explored a number of issues, as I said, with the chair of this board and our chief fiscal officer. You're going to get an update later tonight on where the town stands on its quarterly reporting. And based on what this number is, we'll take a look at what else we can do there.
Okay, so we're going to revisit this conversation after we make the town presentation? Is that what I'm hearing?
Not tonight, but we will revisit this after we, now that we know what the number is or the range is from the Board of Ed, correct?
When will that be?
At a scheduled meeting before this board.
Do we have any idea when that will be?
I would like to do it if we could on March 6th.
Okay. Okay.
The answer is, we need to have this buttoned up by June 30th. I'm very nervous going past a cutoff point. Somehow or other, the Board of Ed has to be made whole by June 30th, has to finish in the black. Maybe things can happen afterwards on the town side, but we are not allowed to finish a year in a deficit situation. So, again, there may be cash flow, there may be different things the town can do with that, but we can't mess around with it. There's just a huge machinery ready to crack down on you if that happens. So we just don't want to go out on that limb.
From my perspective, what we're getting, when Mr. Tetro asked me to come in and sit with he and Mr. Mayor, there's too many unknowns at that time. Number one, there was the unknown as to what the number was we were coming from the Board of Education with. Was it 400,000, 500,000, 700,000, 800,000? We didn't know. Number two, what's the town's fiscal position as we round the bend from the first 6 months? Are we up in revenue? Are we down in expenses? What hasn't been spent? Where does our contract situation stand? Where do we stand with our reserve analysis and those type things? Those were all unknown. We've got a clearer picture of that tonight based on the quarterly report. Number three, what were they going to get from the state, from the Board of Education? Dr. Title, I don't think you specifically have that number yet. Have you gotten that payment yet?
We have the excess cost payment.
The excess cost
No.
payment? Right, but that's due this next
That's due this
week or
month.
so.
Yes.
Right. So all this is now coming into fruition. Now, there are certain options that were discussed at that meeting that depend on all those other factors going into place. And those are options that need to be discussed not just at this board, but I'd say at the Board of Selectmen level as well. Because none of them are great, but they are options that we have. And as I think Mr. Stone pointed out correctly, there's not a lot of operating options on the town side of the house, given that that budget is, A, very small compared to the Board of Ed side to start, and B, quite lean based on actions we did last year. But there is a sense of urgency here in going through this on March 6th is the appropriate thing to do. But I think we have better information, better available information right now than we did even 3 weeks ago. Is that a fair statement?
I would agree with that. I mean, this is the kind of first update since we've talked a few weeks back in terms of how definitive these numbers are, so.
Mr. Mayor, do you have anything to add?
I think you put it exceptionally well. Thank you.
I just think that, I think the administration should start thinking about cost savings now, emergency cost savings, because we're burning daylight. Since this issue first came to light until March 6th, we will have burnt a third of the time we have to try to save the money. We had 6 months approximately on January 3rd. We will now be here on March 6th, and 1/3 of the time that, and we are spending money every single day. So to the extent that the administration can start putting together some emergency savings now, maybe not to get to the 700,000, but at least some start to stop some of the spending in certain areas that are the least painful, it might be a good start.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we've looked at each of those items. We've also, again, based on some of the options we discussed back, there are some ways out. We just needed further information to, and I think, again, Mr. Flynn put it well in terms of there's no good option. It's not like we had $2 million sitting around in some account we can just pull out and say, no problem, we'll take 700 grand out of that. So whatever we do, it's going to be a question of trade-offs. All right? And we're ready to I think with this information and where we are, start setting some priorities on how we do that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, when Dr. Title first presented this thing, you put together a list and you said, this is the stuff I'm comfortable with. And I think I responded back to you, I'm like, well, we're going to have to go into some areas you're uncomfortable with. Well, the town's going to have to go into some areas that they're uncomfortable with as well. I mean, we're all going to have to tighten the belt, and it's going to be uncomfortable because there's just no $700,000 number that's just sitting out there.
Yeah, I think, as we said from day one, there are no comfortable options.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone would argue the other side of that.
We've had to do some uncomfortable things as well. When you get complaints that the snow isn't being removed in the parking lots of certain schools, then you'll know why.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Walsh, I didn't cut you off, did I?
No, you didn't.
Okay. Anybody else? You're fine, Chris? Mr. Becker?
Yeah, just Dr. Title, at the end of the year, now I understand the whole issue about balancing the books at the end to some extent, but you're saying that even if we wanted to, as a town, transfer money back in, as is done to close out the year, that any sort of transfer back to balance out would have to occur, all the approvals and everything,
By
prior
June
to the
30th.
end.
Correct.
There's no way as part of our.
I wouldn't risk it. I mean, you'd run that by your auditors, but I wouldn't risk it. There's towns right now, there's a town up in the hinterlands that's going through this right now where they did some stuff in July to cover some expenses back from the prior year, picked it up in the audit, and now they're up with the state because they overexpended their budget. So you don't want to mess with it. I would get the thing cleaned up so we finish, and then if transfers can be made in July to patch whatever hole was created, well, that's a different issue. But we've got to finish the year in the black, and we can't be making journal entry transfers on August 10th and hoping that the auditor will be okay with that. I'm very uncomfortable with that.
So do them and then clean it up on the town side. I mean, but
Well,
it's
you
gotta
know,
be
the
done.
Board of Ed has a specific duty in the statute to not overextend its budget.
No.
The town has maybe a little more flexibility. I don't know. That's not my department, but
Yeah, no.
Boards of Ed, that we can't risk it. And so I would really encourage us to take action. I mean, that's even very late. We're talking about March being late. I mean, if we're hoping that something will get approved on June 27th because some body has to approve it, that is way too nerve-wracking for us.
No, and that's why I'm asking to clarify. I understand what you sort of need to do, but
Yeah.
just even with the mechanics of the votes and things like that,
Right.
because if it turns into some sort of a situation where it involves multiple boards, there's a timeline to it as well.
Yes, I understand.
You know, so I don't know, tonight, obviously, I think we're getting towards the end on the BOE part, but to Mr. Walsh's point, maybe, I don't expect any of us to vote or try to take action or anything like that tonight, but maybe see some of how the town goes and maybe have some of that conversation, at least start a little bit tonight to start, formulating it in everyone's minds. I'm not against that on my end, because I've said from the beginning that I'm worried about the timetable and it getting too close and some of the concerns there, so.
Mrs. Alvin?
Dr. Title's correct. The state statutes are very clear on the Board of Education having closed their books out on June 30th, and it's most important to the 9 members of the Board of Education because they're held harmless for everything but a balanced budget. And that's the one thing that those 9 members can have to answer to the State Department of Ed for, an unbalanced budget. So those 9 members, they want a balanced budget on June 30th.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just working through the mechanics and just making sure I generally had an understanding on that end. I mean, the town, obviously, oftentimes when they clean everything up, ends up with some surpluses and some adjustments and encumbrances, and so I'm trying to work kind of through how that may fall as it rolls in, and how that maybe can help, but how to make sure that we walk, that fine line come the end of the year with those possibilities, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Anybody else? Thank you, Mrs. Alvin. Anybody else? Seeing none, we look forward to the update. We'll be in touch. Mr. Tetra, I'd like to have that conversation with you, and I'd like to get our board briefed as soon as we can, after we hear what's on the town side. All right. Please, Mr. DeWitt.
Is there any opportunity for anyone else on our board to maybe have some inputs to help out?
Everybody.
Yeah.
There's no question. Yeah, no,
Right.
I mean,
How-
that's,
How best could we do that? Because I want to make sure we're,
yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to sit here and talk about it this evening, because that's not what this is for, but, I have some thoughts that, might be of help. I don't know how to.
Anybody, no, I appreciate that. Anybody who has some thoughts that might be of help, in fact, everybody who has some thoughts that might be of help on this, feel free to email me directly, and I will make sure you're involved in the process. As with everything, openness, transparency, full involvement. These discussions have gone, because of lack of information, they've been very superficial, I'll say.
Yep.
Saying, do we have options? Are there things that can be done? I referenced the insurance thing earlier. Where does that stand? How much is available there?
Right.
To assist them? Because to Mr. Becker's point, something like that does not require other approvals.
No, I'm
Because
with
it's
you.
not the town side.
Yep.
That all stays resident within the Board of Education budget.
Right.
Right? So that's a viable option if there was enough there. and we all felt comfortable, we wouldn't necessarily have to take a vote on it. We would just have to nod in agreement that they
Right.
could do it.
But that's getting back to Mr. Walsh's point tonight and my point the last meeting. We're burning daylight here.
There's no
And-
question.
And if there's 500,000 sitting around today, 3 weeks from now, there'll be 450 or 400. So the longer we wait, if we wait till the last day and say, oh, didn't happen, then we're in real trouble, right?
And that's why Mr. Tetra and Mr. Mayor get paid the medium-sized dollars.
Oh, that's why.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll send you something that way.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely correct. The flag has been raised here, and they have to manage the town accordingly. There's no doubt about it.
They'll come to us and they'll give us a report.
Yeah. So, item number 4, to review the town financial position versus budget as of Q2 fiscal year 14. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Couple of introductory remarks before we get into the actual papers and the numbers. The variance analysis for the 6-month review, the second quarter review, was done from both a top-down and a bottom-up, with both top-down and bottom-up approaches. By top-down, what I mean is the finance staff went through, the munis report, the high-level numbers to pull things out that we thought looked like there was going to be significant, meaningful variances. And we also had each department go through their expenses and their revenues to get their input on what they thought were significant items. In addition, we did vacancies, for example. We just pulled all the vacancies together, so because you'll see that there is a specific vacancy number on the second report we'll look at, which is the projected net estimate variance for the year ending, excuse me. So that was the approach, and with that, you have the landscape report, fiscal year 14 year-to-date revenue variance expense as of December 31, 2013. It is absent page numbers. Just apologize for that. But it is, 10 pages or so in length?
Mr. Mayor, can we start with the summary page?
And so, yeah, my explanation is how do you want to proceed? Yeah, because I don't know who's reviewed this, hasn't reviewed it, has specific questions.
Is everybody okay with starting with this and getting, because I want to make sure we understand this first, because I'm, quite frankly, personally having a little trouble with this one. So if you could just, this would be the one-pager that comes down to a net estimated variance of a positive 425. Let me tell you where my problem is, just so that I can understand. So it looks like, when I read this on the face of it, it tells me that we have $897,000 more in revenue than we had anticipated having this year, to date.
Correct?
It tells me, though, that we've spent $472,000 more than we thought we would spend through December 31st.
I think you just switched tenses there, or switched periods. No, I mean, the revenue and the expense relate to the full year estimate, as the
My
title.
apologies, full year, but it says that as of December 31st, our projection is that we will spend $472,000 more.
What it says is that the variance for the period ending June 30th, 2014, based upon experience through December 31, provides these numbers. So all these numbers are full-year estimates based upon what we know theoretically today.
Okay, so what's the difference between what I just said?
Well, because they are because I understood you to say that they are actuals as of December 31. They're not. They are projected for the year.
They're informed by actuals through
Correct.
December 31st.
Excellent word, yes.
So they include half-year actuals and half-year of estimate.
Correct.
Okay. And it's saying that we're going to be $897,000 more in revenue.
Yes,
but we're going to have expenses of $500,000 more?
yes,
Okay.
for a net positive of 425,000.
Or a net negative of 472,000, because how are we spending 472,000 more than we had agreed to spend?
The biggest one there is Public Works Operations, $430,000. That number is primarily storms. That $430,000, about 360 is, or 370 is the extra cost for overtime, salt, all the expenses that go into the activities relating to plowing and cleanup from storms. That was based upon the $130,000 that was over budget December 31, combined with estimates for the last couple of storms. I actually tried to get time to call Mr. Scott today to see how our estimate related to actual in this last storm. And then what we knew when we did these numbers, we knew this last storm was coming, and then we added another storm and a half or two.
Question about, can I?
I did call Scott, and he's told me he would have a definite number tomorrow on the storm of the past week, if you want it.
Please.
His original estimate for the storm was between 50 and 150. So we picked 100.
Mr. Brown?
So we do budget for storms.
We have a snow removal number.
And
Yes.
what is that number?
125.
That's what we budget per year.
The overtime for snow removal in the DPW operational budget. Yeah.
And on one storm, we've already been over it by 130,000?
No, if you're looking at it was 80,000 as of December, but then we knew that obviously in the month of January and up through like last week.
Oh, you were just saying it was 130 as of...
It was 130 as of the day
As
we,
of, like, last week.
the day we, well, a week and a half ago, I
But
guess.
let's just,
Whatever.
can we
Please.
back up a little bit? What do we budget? I understand snow removal overtime is, you're saying is 125,000. That's what the budget is?
Yes,
But that's not the whole budget for storms, right?
correct.
So when he puts his budget together, what does he assume that we're going to have to expend per season for storms?
That I don't know. I mean, I can show you the actuals in the budget book of what we've expended in that line item over the past couple of years.
Because it just seems, okay, we've had how many storms, and we're going to be $500,000 over budget, and it's only the middle of February.
Well, that's estimated through the end of the year based upon another couple of storms and based upon the last storm costing $100,000.
All right, so do we go over this? I just like, you know what I like to see, I guess, is how often we go over per year, maybe over the past 5 years.
Okay.
Because maybe what we're not doing is budgeting enough to cover these storms.
Well, I think it's all over the
We may
map.
get lucky one year, we don't have that many, but
If in the actual, the 14 budget book, just on the overtime snow removal line, which clearly isn't all the costs related to a storm, but in fiscal 10, it was 146,000, fiscal 11, it was 291, fiscal 12 was only 48.
fiscal
I don't know how
sandbagging
you
on
vote.
fiscal 12, right? So they only.
No, it's
put in-
not sandbagging, this is actual recorded numbers.
That's actual.
It's actual.
That's actual.
It's actual.
All right.
So it's a number that varies greatly, that is therefore, a crapshoot. Use like
I
a,
don't know if it needs to be-
we use like a 3-year average probably for this budget item, would be my guess.
Is that what he does?
Well, can we find out for that budget season to make sure he's prepared to talk about that? Because obviously with this number going so over, I think he should be prepared to discuss how he comes up with that number, whether it's an average over 3 years, 5 years.
Well, if you remember the budget, as of this last year's budget, the budget for the current year, June 30, 14, I created a budget report that has 3 columns identifying the source or the methodology of how the number is projected. It's either If it's documentable, like a lease, taxes, state governors, if it is department head estimate because of, their expertise, knowledge, and average of the current situation, and averages might not play as key a role, and 3-year average. So theoretically, all numbers in the budget are estimated based upon one of those 3 methods.
So then maybe we can go back over the past 4 or 5 years and see what the actual versus budget was, and we can see how close he's been. For
Yeah,
the-
but it's going to be based upon averages. I mean, it's based on averages. I mean, you're not going to be close. 1 year's 291, 1 year's 45.
That's the actual.
Yes.
I want to match that to the budget. to
Yeah,
what-
that's what I'm saying. It's not, if the budget was the average, that would be 100 and whatever,
Yeah, but
that'd be.
is that- oh, do we know that's what it is? Is that what
175.
he puts in? Do we know? We don't know, we said, so we need to ask him. Like Mr. Walsh just said, how he comes up with the number and what that number is. Does he put in for the same every year? The budget?
No, like I said, as of, I don't know what he did prior, as of right now, I'm thinking, I'm guessing, I'm assuming, whatever words you want to use, that the most likely method of budgeting that would be 3-year average. Do
I
I know
agree.
specifically, but I have no idea.
Okay, so I agree that would be the logical way, but if we can get it from him, thanks.
Yeah, and by the time he's here for his presentation, the storms might be over, and we might actually know. I understand, actually, there's another storm coming in next Saturday, or 10 Saturdays? I don't know, I was looking at the weather report today. It's supposed to get down to 0 on February 27th, in case you care about that.
Mr. Leclerc,
I
you
care,
had a
it's damn cold.
Does it make a difference if we have one major storm or multiple little storms? Like, did we get money back from the state for NEMO last year?
If you have major storms, then you potentially have the, a governor's emergency, federal emergency, and you get refunds. You have lots of little storms, then you would not get refunds, reimbursements. It also makes a difference whether it's a nighttime storm or a daytime storm. The people, are they already here? Are they working, so they're working on normal work hours, or are they working on overtime hours? So it's almost everything about the storm, the intensity of the storm, the fierceness of the storm. They all have an impact upon how much resource is required.
Okay. And so how does, like, if we get money back from the state, does that go net against
Yes.
this amount? Okay. So
Yeah,
we
so
wouldn't
with
see-
FEMA, for example, we did our best to net back the FEMA reimbursement against, or the anticipated FEMA reimbursements, against the various budget line items that they were expensed out of.
But there's no hope for any of that this year?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. DeWitt.
So to answer one of Mr. Brown's questions, my data says historically it's always 125,000 in that overtime line. But the variable, as Mr. Mayor said, is the salt and the ice, right? So the salt and the sand. So there's a $430,000 negative, right? Which again was the overtime and the material.
Overtime, materials.
But right now, as
petrol,
per the Munis report you gave us tonight, which was as of 2/4, so you missed maybe 2 storms, they were only 64%.
That's as of
Spent.
December 31st, though, isn't it?
This is, the report was run on 2/4.
Right, but if it says period 6 on it, that's December. Up in the upper,
This is December. Oh.
I ran it on February 4th, but it was as of December 31st.
So we don't accrue, you don't accrue on this report real-time?
Oh, no.
It's a quarterly report, Chris.
Quarterly report.
It's it's the report through December 31st. It's not through today.
That's not the way, I always thought Munis was, I mean, it is our payroll. So
we can-
do know what that number really is.
We can run a report any given day that is a report that's to that date, yes.
I think-
But this is, the second quarterly report.
No, I
So we
get it.
provided you information as of the end of the second quarter.
Right. The other question is, and it's the same question I have, Mr. Brown, so the 125 I get every year, it's where's the material in the budget? I don't know if it's under, I don't know what it's under. I don't see anything in here that says, I mean, I see paving asphalt, but I don't see any other, maybe special departmental cost or something, I don't know, but we can ask. We can
Yeah,
ask
I-
when he's before.
My inquiries to Mr. Scott was, tell me how much the storms are costing you based upon how much you're budgeted. And how much is it per storm? And if we have another couple of storms, how much will we be over?
Mr. Walsh?
Mrs. Bossy, those numbers that you gave for the overtime for, do you have 13, 12, and 11?
I do not have 13 actuals in this budget book. There's only the 13 budget. But you want the actuals for the other ones? I do.
Because that's last year's budget book, correct?
This is 14, but the timing of it was such that you wouldn't have actuals for 13.
14.
And we had to have been over last, we had to be over last year. Had to have been. I mean, we had a bad winter last winter.
I mean, I can get you
Not
the
as many
actual.
storms, just one.
Well, yeah, one large one that probably cost a
Yeah.
heck of a lot of money.
So what?
They
what
got
do you wanna
they
know?
got reimbursement for that also last year.
Well, Nemo we got reimbursed for Nemo.
Okay.
That was about 225, but that got reimbursed. What years were you asking for?
I guess 11 and 12 are the two you have?
12 fiscal 12 actual was 48,000.
12 actual?
Yep, and fiscal 11 actual was 291.
Would you be able to get us the 13 actual?
Yeah. I don't want to look at that, yeah.
Mr. Walsh, anything else?
That's it.
Okay, so based on this, you're saying that their projection, or your projection, is that for this year, they're going to be over budget by $430,000 due to these storms?
A joint projection. In
Okay.
other words, when you talk to Mr. Bartlett, and you ask him how much you're going to be over, he of course says...
Tell me what the weather's gonna
be. Exactly. So we say, okay, what if you had this number of storms? Then he says, well, then it would be this. I think I picked 2.5 more storms.
Somebody's got to
Seems
tell
low
me
right
what...
now, Bob. See, that seems like next week.
There's an over-under on that. But, but if the storms...
Somebody's got to tell me what a .5 storm is, but I get it. It snows, but it doesn't reach the ground?
From noon to 2, the storm's probably half because everybody's working.
It was a half storm today, yeah.
It's a Camelot storm.
Perfect storm.
Any other,
Working hours, everybody.
any other questions on public works overage right now? If not, let's look at the police overage. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, police overage is, if you go back to the landscape report,
Yeah, I just wanted to hear the color, not just what was on the report.
yeah, the police overage is primarily overtime. I think 150 to 200,000, it's 225 is showing up as the total for police, which is a collection of a multiple number of reports. Excuse me, not multiple number of line items, thank you, Caitlin. But you have 300,000 overtime negative, and then you have 30,000 seasonal payroll positive, 10,000 motor maintenance and repair automotive positive, 20,000 capital outlay positive, and 15,000 educational and memberships positive, for hopefully a net of $225,000.
So what's going on with the overtime in the police department that it's so high this year?
That is better addressed to the police department. However, I do know they are looking at some realignments and reallocations to try to get this number down in the future.
Okay, but they're projecting to be over budget by $225,000, and we don't have a write-up for them as to how
They
they're...
gave us a range on the overtime of between 150 and 300. We used worst case. It could be as low as 150, and it could even be further. They are looking to reallocate some resources around,
Okay, but what's operationally, thank you, no, I get that. what operationally is driving them to be so far over budget on their salary, on their overtime. I'll go to you, Mr. Stone, and then I'll go to Mr. DeWitt. I got you guys. You don't need to.
Is it school security?
I don't know.
I-
You know,
I don't want to speak to it.
Don't.
Mr. Flynn, to your point, when you're asking that question, we have a comment section here.
Right.
And that comment section is supposed to kind of explain what the variance is for.
Well-
Whereas they're talking about a reallocation being looked at.
Well, there's,
I don't really understand how this is really helpful, this comment.
well, and there's two other things.
Because
Yeah.
it's almost like they're trying to say, we're going to try to find a solution to it, but without telling us what the problem is. To your point, what is the problem?
Right.
And have they told you what the problem is?
Well, and to that point, here's two other points on that. Number one, we're holding this quarterly review in mid to late February versus mid to late January, just so we could have follow-up items and would have this information. So the fact that we're 3 weeks later and don't have the information and the police department's not here to address it is unacceptable. And to Mr. Walsh's earlier point, we know we've got a big problem on the Board of Education side that we're trying to resolve. We got an $897,000 good guy on revenue here, but yet we're blowing the budget out here in Public Works and in police. Now, I get it, there's explanations, I understand, but it's a little frustrating not having them here, given we gave this additional time to do our quarterly review specifically so we could get those answers for this. Anything?
So they haven't given you answer. I guess the question, to Bob is, they have not given you an answer on this. You asked for it, you asked for what their variance is and what the reasons for it, and they just told you, we're not going to give you an answer.
They told us they're looking to reduce it.
All right, I think we need to have the chief here at our next meeting and have him personally explain it. I mean, the only way this is going to, I mean, we keep having this problem with different departments at each one of these quarterly meetings. And I think the only way to address it is if one of the department heads is going to have to come here the next meeting and explain it and take a night off and come here and explain it, then I think they're going to understand what we're looking to get. I don't know any other way to explain it. So I guess I'm requesting that Chief McNamara show up at our March 6th meeting so we can fully go over this. And any other department head that we have comments on, we do the same thing.
We
I
will-
also think maybe our reporting committee should get together again and come up with some finer detail on what we're expecting to see in this variance report. Maybe we just weren't clear enough.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Brown?
There's something, Chris?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I, Chris, please. My
So
apologies.
you're going to talk about this too.
I am, but I'll follow.
My apologies, Chris.
No, it's fine. Here's what I don't understand about this report. So let's just look at overtime earnings. The budget's 978 and change. The actual is 602. Yet, you're saying that they're 123% overspent. Now, they're actually only 62% spent as of that number. That's 62%, 978 and 602. So how did we go from 62% actual spent, which is on the Munis report, by the way, to 123%?
Because that's
The-
comparing the full year budget. This is comparing half-year budget.
This is half-year actual to half-year budget.
I get it, but that's only 602 is only 62% of 978. And how far a percentage?
602 is 123.08% of $489,293.
Which is
How far are we through the budget right now?
As of this report?
As of this report, half.
Okay?
We're halfway
So-
through the budget, and we
You're saying
spent
over-
123% of half the budget halfway through the budget.
Okay, but it's misleading.
No,
You're
it's factual and actual.
123%.
It is not misleading at all.
It's 60%. 60% of the budget has actually been spent as of this date.
That is also factual and actual.
So you're just assuming that this 123% overage trend is going to continue?
No, I don't assume anything. I go to the department head, the person who's in charge of the operations and the management, and say, hey, you're over X. What do you think's happening? What are you doing about it? Do you think you can bring this in? The department head looks at it,
Right.
gives me his best estimate of what he thinks it's going to be for the year, and also in this case indicated that there are some structural reallocation of resources they're looking at to try to bring the number down.
Okay.
The one thing you could quibble with was our decision to go conservative and use the full 300,000 instead of something in the middle, 225,000.
Okay. So using your logic, the overtime is bad, right? But the regular pay, right? The regular pay is overspent already. They're already more than 100% on regular payroll.
A regular payroll is frequently overspent because of the way the town records its budget based upon the last agreed-upon union contract, and increases to that contract are carried in contingency. So I'm not certain, but I think the budget for the year ending December 31, 2014, for the police was based upon salaries that were as of the fiscal year 2010. So the budget would be based upon salaries at 2010. The actual would be based upon actual paid, which is on the contract which ended 2013.
Great, because you encumber that, I get it, okay? So what about pay differential? That's 175%. So
That I don't have, but as you can see, that is a timing issue according to the chief. I guess there's different, because I don't know if that gets paid out early in the year. I don't know the detail of that, but according to the information from the department, and I don't have the, the
But your
detail of that.
logic said 50% of the budget, and we're 175%
Right.
over that 50%.
You keep saying logic. I keep saying management expertise and experience.
Chris, I think contractually, that's all due in either July or December. So it's basically a one-shot payout, which is why it would look like it's severely overspent as of the half-year mark.
So then we shouldn't be comparing it to 50% of the budget.
Well, that's why
That's why we say timing in the comments.
on target.
It's a timing issue on target. That's why there's no number over there in the right-hand side. There's no number there. That's not anticipated to be over or under.
Okay,
Okay, I'm
go
going to go
ahead.
to, Chris, let me
I'm
recognize
fine.
Mrs. Leclerc, because she's got a question.
A burning question.
Yes.
No, I think she's right.
Well, because this is where I have issues with how you handle the transfers. In prior years, as soon as a contract was settled, you would make your estimate of what that settlement was and come to us, and we would transfer the money from contingency to these accounts. And then that way, when we had our quarterly reviews, the numbers were more accurate. So like what you're telling us is, we haven't done that transfer yet, so what we're looking at isn't the true picture.
Yeah, when you say prior years, that's not my understanding. That's what's done in prior years. However,
Did it
it
all
was
year long?
something that we brought up at this meeting a couple of meetings ago.
We wanted it done, I thought.
But I wanted it done, you wanted it done, I guess we all wanted it done. Do you remember, was this done in prior year? You didn't
It
want?
had been done in the past, I think a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then nothing settled for a while, quite frankly, because of the timing of the contract, so, but we could transfer out of contingency at least through the 13 salaries, because we know what they are. So you have to be aware that in every contract in the budget book, they're budgeted at different fiscal years, which is the confusing part. Like Chris just brought up, police are budgeted at a fiscal 10, but a different union could be in here at a different fiscal year salary, so every one is different. But to your point, yeah, if we moved it out of contingency, what we knew as of 13, at least the variances would be less.
We would still have variances, but they would be less, correct?
The variances that we're showing on here for payroll, knowing that payroll, the full-time payroll accounts all look skewed due to that issue, was the vacancies. We focused on the vacancies here.
Right, because what's happening now is we don't ever see when a contract is settled and what the cost is until the next budget book. And it used to come to us, and that's
Well,
how
it
came
comes in
to us.
September, and I guess last year, it
But we
comes.
go a whole year without knowing
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, no, there's no reason not to do it. I mean, we discussed it, it just hasn't gotten done, obviously.
Can we make that happen? And so that we can get that on the agenda?
And you're
get that
saying
approved?
for, let me just make sure that I understand.
Whatever we know.
Right,
that's
so that would be
settled.
through the 13 salaries for most of the unions and through the 14 for DPW.
Yeah. I mean, exactly.
Then we'd still have a hole for the 14 for those remaining contracts.
Because they're not settled, so we don't know what they're going to be.
Right. Even though it's budgeted over here in contingency, we don't know the salary.
Exactly. It's, Mrs. Leclerc is absolutely right. It's when it's settled, you've
Yep.
kind of, quote-unquote, locked in.
Yep.
There's always a bit of estimation that goes on there, right?
Right.
Estimating.
So when
Right?
do you want to
Making
do
up
that?
words, I know. Right, you like that late.
Yeah, and that is why the really only variance you're going to have in regular salary is vacancies, which is why,
Except now.
no, the only real variance.
Because they're
the-
either budgeted in the department or budgeted.
Budgeted in contingency. So the only real variance you have is the vacancies, which is why we detailed the vacancies individually and put the vacancies number on the lead sheet.
I agree with Mrs. Leclerc.
Yeah, but typically, like in prior years, we didn't just transfer out in contingency in September. All year long, as we used.
Right, I understand what you're saying, yes.
We would make those transfers, so then we knew what we still had left in contingency versus what had been spent.
I assume
elsewhere.
prior years meant it's like prior to 2009 because no contracts were.
When you took over,
Well,
we had a
no.
period that we had no
Yeah,
settlements.
like 2009, like 10, 11, 12, there were no settlements, so.
Right.
Mr. Brown?
Okay, just going back to Mr. Walsh's point about setting up a meeting on the report committee, is what we are. I'll do that with Caitlin over the next couple of weeks. And again, on that committee was Mr. Stone, Mr. Walsh, and myself. And we'll take a look at this report. It's the second quarterly meeting we've had with it. If any member has any questions or suggestions for the report, just get them over to me within the next week or so. We'll include it in our meeting. Now, under the comments section, most of the comments do address the variances. It just so happens that the police does not. And we did ask for the budget, for this meeting, quarterly meeting, to be moved a couple of weeks, just so that wouldn't happen. So I guess I would suggest to the department heads to ensure that they do have reasons for the variances, especially if it's going the other way. And I would say to us, as members, if we get this, when do you send this out, Caitlin, Thursday or Friday?
Wednesday.
Wednesday. If we look at this over Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and then at that time, we think we want to see a department head, we can always make that request, probably through the chairman.
There's no question we can. I just don't think we should have to.
Right, if the answers are there, then we wouldn't have to, right? If the
Well,
answers are in the, or they give the answers to Mr. Mayor.
Look, the bottom line is, we shouldn't be sitting here looking at a $225,000 problem here in police and not know exactly what's causing that problem, much like we do in DPW. You know, in terms of, we know what the estimating is. And yes, we could say, hey, we used the conservative number of 300,000. My next question is, why did we use the conservative? What is going on in that department that is driving the overage? That's the question. And if that question hasn't been asked 6 weeks after year end, why hasn't it been asked? What's driving the overage? It's a simple question. What's driving the overage?
You mean calendar year end?
Well, through, I mean, basically,
You mean through December 31st?
no, well, I mean, but we're using, we've now.
Mr. Flynn,
Yeah,
we cannot tell you what's driving the overages.
publicly?
I cannot tell you what's driving the overages.
Okay, what I'm saying, Tom, can I just jump in?
Absolutely,
Is
please.
We moved the meeting a couple of weeks beyond the dates that we had them in the past, so we can answer that question. Because we wanted to give the department heads enough time to get back to you. Do I remember this right? This is
Well,
what
we
talked about
also,
in our meeting?
I think we're also keeping.
You can rest assured that the finance department did as thorough a job as they had in the time allotment, which was a greater time allotment. Reports are better, but we cannot answer that question.
Okay. So I would just suggest that we were able to answer that question in further quarterly meetings, because that's why we moved the meetings. Or,
It is our
Chief, at
intent
that
to
point, would
always,
have to
it's
be
always
here.
our intent to have as much information in this report as possible.
okay, in the meantime, I'll set up another meeting, okay?
Yeah, because I think that if we got some type of report and standardized some type of report that had to be supplied to finance, and a department head did not submit it on a timely basis, then I think maybe we'll set what date that department head has to have that to finance. Then, that automatically triggers that department head to show up at our meeting, whether that comes in the next day or not. If the reason's not there, then they have to show up and explain why they couldn't put it on their form. It'll just be an automatic trigger. So if the department head does not want to have to attend this meeting,
He just has to answer the
he'll make
question.
sure that he properly answers the question and properly gets it in on time.
I think the punishment's excessive.
Is that excessive? So it's the same punishment you get, Bob.
We could just dictate that any overage to the budget means that the department head has to be here. We could say that too. If you're over budget, come talk to us.
So what we'll do is, we'll set up the meeting, in this report meeting, and any suggestions you have like that, Chris, if you want to send them over, we'll take a look at it. Thank you.
Sure. Next issue. Anyone else?
I have one question.
Please.
I wouldn't normally bring this up, but the numbers are big, and I'm a little confused.
Microphone.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
The number's big, and this may go in the category of unfair to Mr. Mayor and Ms. Bossi, only because there's a specificness to it that you might not be able to answer. But if you go to the police parking violation fees,
Right.
I'm sorry, it's page 1, 2, 3, 4 of the pages that are printed left to right. 09, fines. There's a $315,000 budget, right? I'm talking about revenue. 315,000. We've collected 70,000, and the answer is reduced revenue due to new train station parking, which doesn't make any sense to me in terms of violations, to tell you the truth.
Well, because they charge $6 for people, because people get tickets when they don't have parking spaces at the old train stations. Now people are using a new train station where they do have parking spaces.
Okay, so that makes
So
my
that's how it makes sense.
Okay, so that makes my question even more, now it even makes it more relevant. So you're saying, however, so we've collected 70,000, and you're saying we're only going to be 50 short, which means you're saying we're...
Yeah, in the evaluation of this account, we identified that there were some outstanding parking fees that had not been aggressively collected, which we feel that with the appropriate resources applied, they will be collected at an 85% ratio. So therefore, that will reduce the shortfall.
And within the next okay.
Yes, sir.
Next 6 months, you'll be able to collect
That's why, yes.
$200,000 on this? Okay. I thought you'd be giving more tickets, that's why I was asking.
Any other questions on this sheet? Okay, we're going to go to Mr. Becker. I saw him first, and then we'll go to Mr. Leclerc.
Thank you. Two things. Just if we could, for a minute, go back on the PD side. Is there a way to get maybe something written, either directly from the chief or someone there, or through finance? I'd actually prefer it to be from the chief if possible, because it seems to me like, let's not wait a couple of weeks. This is a big item. It's probably something that if he had been asked to either be here tonight or to document maybe more thoroughly, he probably would have done versus, having this big kind of question looming. And as I look at, when we have to go back to the education conversation, I think we kind of want to get this information and start formulating all of these things in our minds sooner rather than later. So maybe we can see if that can happen versus him just maybe come here too in March if he wants, but let's not wait a couple of weeks.
I think the important information, Mr. Becker, is, and the whole board actually is, that the administration of the town, the police department, management administration is aware, and the issue is attempting to be addressed. So I think it's also, you're right to ask why, exactly, how come, what for, and that it's appropriate for the chief to come and answer those questions. But you're kind of making an inference that by reporting to you something in writing early, that the management is going to be able to fix the problem sooner or faster or better. I can assure you that the police administration is in all respects of their operations doing their best to management effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, no question there. I just think that we have some questions here, and we're obviously dealing with, the belt tightening issue. So if we can get any information sooner, I mean, I'm putting the request out. I mean, if it turns into the chief showing up here in March versus that, so be it. I guess I ultimately defer to, well, he's not in the room, but the chair in addressing that. But that's one. That's certainly a request that I have, and I think I don't see them having an issue with it. On the other side of this, the contingency, I'm not, maybe I'm missing it in these sheets, but I'm not finding it as I'm thumbing through these pages. You're alluding to the payroll lines, essentially, that there's money that we're kind of earmarking in a sense with the contingency to address those versus pulling them. So do we know where the contingency, at this point, knowing that we're going to have to take money out of the contingency, where it really stands? Or if you can't answer that right now, can we get a report on that soon? Because again, I think when we start looking at places, in order to address possibly that shortfall, contingency would certainly be one of those options. It would be helpful to know where it stands.
The contingency would certainly be one of those options. The contingency account is made up of two parts, what we call normal contingency, which is unknown operational issues, and the second part is contracted contingency, which is basically labor contracts. The contracted contingency portion of that is normally handled in executive session of the Board of Finance.
Correct, except for the fact that at this point, these are knowns that are going to be coming out. So I'm not asking for the hypotheticals on contingency.
I'm saying the
I'm talking about
contracted
knowns.
contingency is handled in the executive session of the Board of Finance.
If that's where we have to do it, then so be it. I mean, I
You can
think-
speak to the chair, but that's where it's done.
So if the vice chair can relay that to the chair, but I think you have an idea of where I'm going with that, with the payroll lines.
Yes.
You say you just want to know a status of contingency.
Well, no, I mean, as of right now, we haven't done any withdrawals out of contingency that I can think of, so contingency is whole, and I understand that there are future contracts that may pull, and I'm not even asking for that. I'm talking about when you mention here that we're using 2010 numbers, yet a contract has been settled, so you're running over on a payroll line versus transferring from contingency, that's a known at this point, a known that I think several members sort of alluded to wanting to be pulled from contingency.
Right, and
So
that is
maybe
easily done.
give us a list of exactly what those
Oh,
are.
no, but Mr. Becker, what you're missing is, after that list comes out, there's a remaining portion in contingency. That would be discussed in executive session.
Correct. I'd like to know the knowns on the overruns.
That's already been addressed this evening when it was agreed that those were going to be presented and transferred.
Correct, but I'm not looking to wait till whichever meeting the transfers show up, because we're having this conversation about where we are regarding to the education side. So I think it would be helpful to know that, not a couple weeks from now when it comes to a meeting to do transfer. I understand that
You
that's
still,
happen.
to understand what remains in contingency, still has to be a Board of Finance executive session conversation. I don't know how to say it more clearly. I think Mr. Flynn can say it more clearly.
What you're saying is that basically the entire contingency issue isn't going to be cleaned up by the resolution of some transfer of some of the old contracts, because there's still other contracts that will be included in contingency that will not be transferred, right?
Right, and
But
those-
the amount will be a much smaller amount
Right.
that's left in contingency.
Right, and that discussion is normally held about that portion in executive
In a
session.
private executive session.
Yes.
Yeah, that,
Is that, I understand what you're saying, but I
Yeah.
understand what you're trying to get to, too.
yeah,
Yes.
I'm trying to get, there are knowns that are not going to be in private executive sessions.
The
There are
knowns will
that
not
are
help
gonna
you
be-
with the unknowns.
I would like to have a better grasp. I'd like a better grasp of the knowns. That's what I'm asking for. And we can address the unknowns, obviously, in the executive session portion. And I would have to assume that pretty soon we're going to see them in the transfers, but it would just be better to see them sooner rather than later in this conversation. That's all.
It's a fair point, Mr. Becker.
Thank you.
And it goes to it's further about Mrs. Leclerc's point regarding doing the transfers on a timely basis so that the contingency is as clean as we can make it for what's known, right?
Correct. It's a build off of what she had brought up.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Walsh,
Does anything to do with any of these?
feel free.
Bob, can you give me a summary of what the $150,000 differential is in solid waste and recycling? Because when I look at the variance report, number one, I don't get the 150, so I presume that's some type of estimate that you've done or some calculation that you've done. But why? Is it based on the fact that, is it caused by extra expenses? Because one of the figures for part-time payroll talking that it's for extra coverage at the scale house, and that you're going to correct that with video surveillance system. But then you say that there's lower tonnage resulting in lower expense and lower revenue, which, that's fine that both are lower, but it obviously means that the expense is still higher than the revenue by $150,000. I don't know if that's what you're saying.
The 150 is a combination of the 50,000 for the scale house operator, which is the part-time payroll line,
Part-time payroll line to
solid waste and recycling.
the 40.
The 50.
Oh,
correct.
56,906?
Yeah,
No.
if you go out to the far right, there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
$50,000 number there, yes.
56,906?
But they don't see that. Yes, that's the line item I'm talking about. They're overspent for the half a year, right? They're at 45,000 and half a year would be the 28,
Yes.
okay? So if you look at the comments, there's extra coverage that is
Yes.
needed at the scale house due
Yep.
to it being elevated, and they're going to be getting a video system in there, which will make it, his projection was by the end of the year, 50,000 over budget. So there's the 50 of
Okay.
the 150. The other 100 is in the contracted property services.
Yep.
For this was a timing issue, but it looks like it's extremely over budget for the half-year mark. The 355 in relation to the 249.
So how's the,
So there's another 100 estimated out for the rest of the year.
So
That's going to result in 100 overage for that line.
is it really a timing issue then, or are we just over budget on the line?
Well, it looks like it's extremely over budget.
Yeah.
But that represents 7 months of expense. So by the end of June, he's projecting it to be 100 over budget.
Okay, and what's the reasoning for being $100,000 over budget?
I think it was a contractual change in the cost to deliver.
I might have it. Hold on.
I remember the conversation, but I don't remember the specifics.
And I have a little bit more wording if you don't understand the part-time payroll as well. But there's a 6% increase was based on a temporary recycling center that was built at our transfer station due to a loss of a permanent facility after a few months. So there was an additional cost due to rebuilding, I believe, after Storm Sandy. So after a few months, we were able to utilize another facility, which was near our original one, but overall, it was going to increase our expenses for the year.
Okay. All right. I mean, that's, I guess, another example of something our committee can talk about, because if we had a little more explanation, and I understand there's not a lot of area in the
That's the
comment
problem,
section.
I mean, I have a
and
whole
that's the problem.
page.
And maybe, I guess we're going to have to figure out a way to get there, because, like, your explanation there completely covers the answer to the question. But if we had a way to somehow expand and know that, it would probably prevent me from asking a stupid question, I guess.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to condense what I
Sure.
can in
I know,
a way
I-
that's meaningful.
Mhm.
Every department head it sends something different, so I'm
Yes.
trying to kind of make it all uniform somewhat, but they're all different formats, so it's hard.
Do you think I mean, just globally, I guess, for this whole body, I mean, the reporting committee's going to have to take it up, but globally, if we had a consistent standard report,
Well,
would
that's
that,
what this is.
would that assist your department in regards to putting this together?
No, we have a consistent standard report. We send out an email, they respond to the email. What we can do is, in addition to these X number of pages, we can send you what we get as well in another report. So it's where those items where we think there's more detail necessary.
Yeah, and that
And
might.
we'll do that in the
And that might
future.
actually help, because if we could come up with, Jim, you're the chairman, some type of report of what we're requesting, even if we got that back, and that was just an attachment, if I had a question about that, I could look up that specific department head's comments, I guess.
And we can do that.
Some cases, there may not need to be additional comments other than what you
Correct.
wrote here.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
On this whole page?
Yes, feel
Okay.
free.
Going to the revenue items, why are we over 700,000, or why do you expect us to be over $700,000 on the current year tax levy? What do you think the reasoning, why we'd be over like that much? Is it because of, I don't know.
It's primarily the difference between the budgeted senior tax relief and the actual finalized senior tax relief.
Okay.
As of right now, it appears that the collection rate is like right on to the .00001.
Yep.
But so this is primarily just that, 700,000.
Right. Are we going to be discussing separately, Mr. Chairman, I'm asking you for your input on how you want to go. There was a Schedule C that was supplied. Are we going to be discussing that, or Mr. Mayor going to be talking that individually, or should I ask questions about that through this report?
Why don't we turn to that right now and ask it through this report? Since bottom line, I found this executive summary, though we beat it to death, pretty useful.
Thank you.
And, you know, it's a good jumping off point, I think, for the discussion of where the town stands financially, so I do want to say that. So let's go from that
To the
to
Schedule
Schedule
C.
C.
Thank you for your comments.
It's
It's Exhibit C, it's labeled.
Bob, do you want to give some background? I mean, I guess I have questions on background of, is this something we normally get, or is this something new we're doing this year?
I don't know if you normally, but this is something that, most of these line items are within the governor's budget,
Yes.
and we get information early, like we have for the budget for 15, we have the current governor's budget information, and then it changes multiple times, and then we get what we think is going to be the, you know, after the budget process is over and the legislative session ends in Hartford, we end up with what we think is the real final. And so that real final, so basically what we have here is, it says estimated 12/31/13, but that's what we pretty much know is going to be the real final, which is $201,000 greater than what's in the budget.
So on the lines where it says Fairfield budget and it says 0, did we have budgeted line items for those? Or did we put a 0 in there, that we were going to get 0 for the year, and now we're seeing a positive, like, let's just pick one, for example. Let's just take the Pequot Mohegan grant. Did we have 0 in our budget, and now we're getting $287,000?
Yeah, the original governor's budget had that zeroed out. There was going to be no money from that specific line item. There had been money prior years.
Yep.
Original governor's budget said nope, none, nada.
Okay.
But then, when the legislation session ended, it was restored.
But all of these numbers, these grant numbers and stuff, are normal grants that we've gotten in the past. It's just that when we were planning and we got the governor's budget, some of them have zeros in them, so we weren't going to get any revenue from those sources.
Correct.
And then some of them, because of the legislative decisions that were made, we now are getting revenue from them.
Correct.
Okay, okay. And that ends up to be a positive 201,520.
Yes, which was a delightful, positive surprise when it was all over.
Great. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay, I presume that,
I have one more question in regards to the sheet.
go right ahead. That's what
Can
I
you
was asking.
explain to me the business interruption insurance? How we're getting 200,
The
278.
Penfield has a business operation they rent
Yes.
out.
Yep.
We lost revenue, we filed an insurance claim, so the revenue line items will have negatives, and but this is the amount that we believe we're going to be getting a check for this fiscal year for lost revenue due to Storm Sandy.
Okay, so Jerry reduced his income projections. Is that what I'm led to believe for Penfield because of the storm? But
Correct.
then he filed a claim.
Correct.
I'm just trying to track this in my head.
No, you got it
But then he
right.
filed under a claim under our business interruption insurance.
Correct.
So now we're actually getting closer to what we had hoped would have been our full revenue from Penfield.
Yes.
Okay, and so this is a $270,000 check. Have we received it, or is this something, a claim's been put in for it?
The claim's been put in for it. I think it's been approved, and I'm anticipating it. I've been told that we should anticipate it in the next week or two. Yeah, we were
That's-
rigorous and aggressive in our documentation to the insurance companies.
Great. No more questions in regards to that.
Mr. DeWitt?
I have a couple munis report questions. Is that jumping too far ahead, or do you want to stay in the variance report?
I'd like to stay on the variance reports.
Okay.
Can we do that at the very end?
Yep.
Okay. Is there any other questions on this document here, which lays it out? You know, I want to point out, going back to our earlier discussion with the Board of Education, and this is one of the kind of the moving pieces, right? We have $897,000 of additional revenue here, which helps us out a little bit with what we have going on the Board of Education side. And that was one of the items that came up, although that wasn't the exact number, when we had the initial discussion over what some of our options were, right? What also wasn't there in that was the overage in the, specifically DPW, right? That 430 number was not a number that was ever discussed or brought up in those discussions. But those are the type of things we're going to have to look at, and why this is so relevant to the discussion related to what are we going to do to help the Board of Education. So I just wanted to point that out. That's these are some of the moving targets that we're all going to have to wrestle with as we go through this. Since we're off this, Mr. Mayor, as the Chief Fiscal Officer, other than DPW and the storms, and other than finding out what's going on with the police department, what other things are concerning you, or where are our risk points, known risk points, in the budget for the rest of the year? You know, what are we not asking questions about that we should be?
You know, we did our best to be as rigorous as possible, given snow days and all the other activities that were taking place. But as you notice, we have a favorable $100,000 in heart and hypertension. I mean, these claims can come in, episodically. Workers' comp looks to be running okay. I mean, That's not a general fund issue, that's a,
Internal service
internal
fund.
service fund issue. But it doesn't affect the general fund, but it affects tax rates going forward in total dollars and things like that, obviously. Prior year tax levy, something what we tried to do is, we've gone into the history books to build history, which was never done before, so we can say, what kind of experience do we have, both prior year tax levy, interest liens, with, assessment abatements, with respect to, given years after a revaluation. So we're trying to do some analysis, some very simple regression type analysis to look at those numbers. And basically, the prior year tax levy is coming in. If you do that analysis, which we didn't do last year, but it's looked like it's coming in where that analysis, where we would have budgeted it last year. So I think that number should be fine. Investment income, we basically took some additional mark-to-market negative because Ken Brackfield's always in my office telling me how dangerous investments are. So, there might be some upside there. Workers' comp is, unemployment is, I think, pretty clean. There might even be some upside there. Yeah, so, and everyone is understanding that it is, everyone being the department managers, when we have these discussions, when we prepare this, it's their responsibility to try to come, within budget, and if there's any surprises there, to alert us.
Okay. So those are the items. So there's nothing we're not asking about that is an area of concern right now.
Not that is in my mindset, no, sir.
Okay. We have this report, which we've been referring to periodically, which people reviewed, which are the comments. Does anybody have any specific questions on this? Mr. DeWitt, do you have questions on the report itself, on the comments, or are they other?
No, mine is all muted.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else on this? Seeing none, Mr. DeWitt, why don't we go to you with your Munis questions?
I think they're quick. Just trying to remember, so information, right, IT, we put $100,000 in contingency, and then we transferred $75,000 back out to his operating budget. So there's still $25,000 in there. Any plan for the IT director to be coming to us anytime to be asking for that $25,000 in anticipation of maybe next month he's going to come before us again and we'll need an IT plan because the same thing will happen to him again maybe? Just playing Kreskin here a little bit.
I know. I'm looking for the IT in this book. The intent, I'd have to look at, I'm trying to remind myself if there's any IT in the variance report.
I didn't see any in there. I looked kind of quick, but.
No, we're trying to, if I remember that conversation, at the time, the chair asked me what number I thought they could manage to.
Yep.
And I thought the 75,000 number, as I understand it, that is more or less on track.
Oh, yeah.
But if we had some major, event or some maintenance and repair that came up, then yeah, that would be where they would go first. But as of right now, it's my understanding that they're managing to the number less that 25,000.
Okay. And that number won't get allocated to him, to that department?
That would require Board of Finance approval.
Right, okay, great. And I think my only other question is under Public Works. So, I now understand that this is from December, but there was a, if I can get to it. Between Public Works Administration and Public Works Operation. Public Work Operations is where we'd see most of the snow kind of charges, is that correct? As far as overtime and,
Yeah.
right? So the overtime in Public Works Administration is 500% overspent as of December. So I'm kind of curious what's up with that. Because it was only budgeted for $500, and now it's It's almost 3,000. And since that's not a guy pushing a snowplow around, I'm kind of curious what that is.
I think they have a new secretary, but I could check. I don't know. Yeah. Well, it's not going to show up on the variance report because we have a threshold of $10,000 on the variance report.
No,
which is
that's why I look
Yeah.
at Munis, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. So they have a new secretary that's not in their budget.
No, they're in the budget, but clearly someone's working more overtime hours than they budgeted, so I would have to ask
A lot more.
Michelangelo.
5 times more. What else have they got? Oh, fees, they're fees and professional services. But I think that's it. Those are the two things that stood out.
Any other questions on the quarterly reports for the town? Anything outstanding?
I have one.
Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
On the expenses on the executive summary, there's a $68,000 negative. Was that for expenses for a recent refinancing that went over?
That was the impact of the refi on this current year.
Okay. A couple of years ago, 1 or 2 years ago, we did a refinancing where we took in a multi-million-dollar premium.
Yes, sir.
And in the current budget year, we have some amount of that premium that's in an account, correct? That's
I
applied?
think that $1 million of that is being used this fiscal year.
Okay. And we have some more left to be taken in future years, correct?
Correct. It's being allocated over a 3-year period equally.
All right. Is there a way to take that premium more aggressively, legally, more aggressively, that might be able to help us towards our $700,000 problem?
The direct answer to that is yes. But, the ideal answer is, allocating it over the 3-year life. But, yes.
All right. Could that be one of the things that
Options,
Tom, you,
yes.
and Mr. Mayor and Mr. Tetro can explore and report back to us on, and legally what we can do
No question.
because of this problem we're having this current year?
No question,
Okay.
from my perspective. Anyone else on these items? All right, so our follow-up items on this.
I'd like to make one final comment, I guess. Remember that there's a budgeted $675,000 for contribution to surplus.
Yes.
So there's no variance there. That's still in the budget
Yes.
as a potential positive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple questions. A couple of follow-up items we have. The Reports Committee has to meet as we go through this process iteratively and see how this can be improved, right? Number one. Number two, on March 6th, we're scheduled to start at about 7:30 to review the Board of Education. Now, I know starting at 7 p.m. might be difficult for some members, but is that a possibility that we should entertain in order to, and I don't need an answer now, go back, look at your calendar, think about it, come back to me with an email as to whether that works or not. What I'm trying to do is, we need to review what our options are and what we're going to do for the current year problem with the Board of Education. Now, here's the thing, if we don't come to a resolution that night on that item, we've got several meetings during the course of that week, so we can tack on an extra half hour at the beginning of any one of those meetings we want, if we need some additional information or what have you, in order to bolt this down over the first couple of weeks of March, to say what this board feels comfortable with for any items that we need to do. We can also go back to the administration during that time and say, can we explore this, that, and the other thing? All right? So we have some flexibility there if we don't resolve it that evening. But I think we all want to discuss it that night, correct? Correct? You guys?
Yeah.
Mr. DeWitt?
Quick procedural question. So if we discuss it, because we'll be in joint session with the Board of Selectmen at that point, could we make allocation changes real time, or is that not?
Well, here's the thing. Let me explore with Mr. Tetro
Okay.
how he wants to handle the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
We might even notice this as a separate meeting to start at 7 and then our meeting starts at
Got it.
7:30.
Okay.
Right? Or, quite possibly, if we come to that point, Chris, maybe we could do as you suggest. It's an excellent point. Again, I'll defer to Mr. Tetro and to the members of his board as to how they want to manage their operations.
I'm with you.
But I think it's an excellent suggestion. So I think that's our goal on March 6th, and we'll go from there. And by that point, Dr. Title will be firmer on his 700 number. He'll have gotten the money in from the state, which I think he'll feel much more comfortable about. Maybe we'll get some additional clarity to some of the questions we've had tonight on the town side, and we can move forward from there. Mr. Stone?
I think that's a good idea, I have no problem with it. But can we, if we're starting at 7 and we have the budget at 7:30, can we just limit that between 7 and 7:30?
Yeah,
Because
cut
I
it
don't want
off.
to cut it off, because,
And again, I'm not saying right now definitively we're going to
Right.
do that. I want to hear from you guys, right? Because I know 7 o'clock is a problem for some people, and I want to know, you know. But if we got to start at 7:30, then maybe we push back the budget meeting to 8:15, right? Because I think we're going to need 45 minutes, right? Mrs. Leclerc?
That is a problem for me, especially on March 6th. You know, like, a different date would be, would be better. Is there a possibility we could reschedule our regular monthly meeting and have a real meeting for this item, or you don't think it will take that long to discuss it?
I think it could take a long time, so I think, and that's why I held open the possibility of going to another meeting. So what we can do is, and thank you for the suggestion and for the candor, can people look at their calendars and see what days that week may work for us to have another meeting that night?
This is the first week of March?
We already have one on the
Have one
March
on the
4th
4th.
and March 6th.
We have two that week.
I understand we do. What I'm saying is maybe we need to meet March 5th.
That's Ash Wednesday, if that makes any difference to anybody.
What's the agenda on the 4th?
4th is the kickoff of the budget hearing, right? 6th is Board of Education. 5th is Ash Wednesday, which you can get your ashes and come, but go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, no, but we're also now looking for PD to come too, so that may be a little bit longer, right? I mean, just.
You know, let me worry about that.
Yeah,
Let's get.
just bring it up.
Yeah, let's get this one revolved first. Thanks. No, thank you for that, but, I mean, I just throw it out there as an opportunity for us. Come back to me with your best thoughts on it, and I will take the collective wisdom of our members and go from there on it. We don't need to resolve it now. I see people on there.
What about the week before?
They've got to get to the Board of Education. I don't want to do that to Dr. Title.
That's a free week.
That's next week.
That's next week.
I'll be on a beach.
And I think that,
please.
I think,
I don't care.
in deference, I think,
Yeah?
yeah, I think the administration has some internal discussions to have too, so I want to give them due time as well. Anybody else? All right, can I get a motion? I'll take it from Mr. Brockfeld. Do I have a second from Mr. DeWitt? All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, we're adjourned, everybody. Good night, and welcome to budget season.